The film begins with a wide-angle shot high above the tree line of a lush, green rainforest. A sequence of images of Jake Sully, Sam Worthington, a crippled war veteran and former Marine, is intercut. He awakens in a massive spaceship en route to Pandora, a densely forested Earth-like moon orbiting Polyphemus, a massive blue planet similar to Jupiter. He is one of many passengers who have awakened after nearly 6 years of cryosleep en route to Pandora. As he drifts out of his sleeping pod in 0G, he is attended to by the ship's crew. He unlocks his locker, which is labeled Sully T. Jake tells us that he had a deceased twin brother, Tom, a scientist, who was to be part of a high-level initiative controlled by corporate and military planners to investigate Pandora's environment and population. Because Jake and his brother are genetically identical, he was provided with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, take up his brother's contract with a corporate military corporation and go light years away to an outpost on the previously seen world, Pandora. Jake agrees to the arrangement as his brother's body is incinerated, acknowledging the concepts of being free and a new start. Jake is one of several troops and civilians set to land on Pandora, 4.3 light-years from Earth, who are being brought from the spacecraft via shuttle. As Jake mulls over his new duty, we see the base and its development, as well as massive mining machinery digging up the Earth in a big quarry. The passengers are all advised to wear full-face breathing masks because the planet's atmosphere will not sustain human life. 20 seconds of exposure to the planet's deadly atmosphere produces unconsciousness, with death happening 4 minutes later. While the other passengers depart and take their first steps onto the base, which is known as Hell's Gate and is ringed by a massive perimeter fence, Jake follows in his wheelchair, receiving the nickname Meals on Wheels from a few snooty Marines. Through voiceover, he admits that he lost the use of his legs during one of his tours of duty on Earth, and that while a spinal injury like his may be repaired, it requires money, which is difficult to come by in the current economy. Jake rushes to a military meeting where Colonel Miles Quaritch, Stephen Lang, is addressing the gathering soldiers and a few civilians. He informs them that they are no longer in Kansas, and he tells them about Pandora's original people, the NA6. Quaritch, who has a large scar on the side of his skull, claims they are hard to kill and that everything out there would attempt to kill you. And, while it is his responsibility to keep his people alive, he declares that he will not succeed, not with all of you. He goes on to say that if they want to survive, they must obey Pandora rules. Jake visits a scientific lab and meets biologist Norm Spellman, Joel David Moore, and Dr. Max Patel, Dilip Rao, both Avatar program participants. We learn about the Avatar program when Jake gets his first sight at his own avatar. Humans are unable to breathe Pandora's air, but the Avatar program allows a human to link with their own avatar, a genetically bred human NA6 hybrid, and operate as if they were a NA6 native. Jake will be able to move and breathe in his virtual body once more. The avatars resemble their human drivers in appearance. When Norm tells Jake that his avatar looks like him, Jake replies solemnly, "It looks like my deceased brother." Dr. Grace Augustine, Sigourney Weaver, the program's science lead, awakens in a specially built pod that ties her to her avatar and flicks up the lid just as Jake and Norm arrive. Norm informs Jake that she prefers plants over humans. She emerges from her pod and speaks with Norm in NA6. She turns to Jake after being satisfied with Norm's knowledge of the language. She informs him that she needs his brother Tom, the PhD who prepared for the Pandora trip for 3 years, but she doesn't need Jake because Jake has no lab experience and has never been attached to an avatar. Jake attempts to indicate that he is a quick learner, but Grace is unimpressed. Grace rushes off to the control room of the facility to meet Parker Selfridge, Giovanni Ribisi, the base commander and representative for the Resources Development Administration, RDA, a company that governs all military and civilian workers on the colony. He informs her that Jake will be her team's security escort while on the planet's surface. Grace informs Parker that she requires a researcher, not a jarhead dropout. She doubts Jake can help her with her botanical studies. Parker responds, stating that he disagrees and that they lucked out with Jake. Because he is a perfect genetic match for his twin brother's avatar, they can use his military skills in an avatar body toward the overall goal of the operation, mining the mineral unobtainium, a potent source of energy that sells for many millions of dollars per kilo and can bring cheap power back to a dying Earth. Parker advises Grace that one method to assist achieve this goal is to win the hearts and minds of the Indians and get their cooperation. Grace claims that the soldiers murdered numerous NA6 under the guise of Selfridge's operation. Jake and Norm are linked to their avatars for the first time the next morning at the lab. Jake, as his avatar, awakens in a separate room, surrounded by other avatars and employees. Within a few seconds, Jake is making his handlers uneasy because he is delighted with his ability to use his legs again and is attempting to walk for the first time since being a paraplegic. Human lab workers are powerless to stop him. A NA6 is over 10 feet tall, often closer to 12, and considerably stronger than humans. A staff worker instructs him to halt and lie down after his long tail knocks down equipment. Jake dismisses him and storms out of the room into the sunlight. He finds himself in a leisure area where other avatars are doing sports and employees are conducting various chores while wearing protective gear. Jake encounters Grace's avatar, who is more patient than actual Grace, and accompany Jake to the barracks, where he is ultimately persuaded to relax. Jake examines his neural queue, a lengthy appendage that resembles a hair braid, before falling asleep. A clump of concealed tendrils is at the end of his queue. When the avatar falls asleep, the bond is severed, and Jake wakes. Later, Jake meets Trudy Chacon, Michelle Rodriguez, a former Marine pilot with whom he will spend many weeks acclimating to his avatar and exploring Pandora. Jake will be the door gunner on her team. Jake meets with Colonel Quaritch, who is weightlifting. The colonel informs Jake that he has reviewed his military record and is impressed by what he did on several of his deployments, including one in Venezuela. Jake is warned by the colonel about the perils that await him in Pandora. He also expresses his belief that the Avatar program is a joke, but it does provide an opportunity for a unique reconnaissance mission, if Jake can find out and tell the colonel what he wants to know about the natives, how to persuade them to move away from the unobtainium ore deposits, and how to hit them hard if they don't. The colonel will make sure Jake gets the surgery he needs to regain use of his legs. The colonel puts on an amp suit, a bipedal exoskeleton used for missions on Pandora, and walks away. Jake, reconnected with his avatar, flies across Pandora's surface in Trudy's gunship alongside Grace, Norm, and others. The crew arrives in a wilderness where Grace and Norm begin collecting flora samples and taking measurements. Jake becomes distracted by his surroundings and stumbles into a field of helicoradian flowers, which are fairly tall and shrink when touched by Jake. Trouble arises as Jake is confronted by a Titanothere, a powerfully armored, hammerhead monster. Grace tells him to maintain his ground and not fire, otherwise the animal would become enraged and charge. Guns have no impact on him because his armor is too thick. Jake manages to keep his footing only when another beast, a panther-like Venator, attacks him. Has approached him from behind, causing the Titan others to flee and encircle their young. The Venator then moves his gaze to Jake. Grace instructs him to flee, and the Venator pursues him, separating Jake from his group. He loses his rifle and is taken down by the beast, but he is able to rescue himself by releasing his bag. The chase eventually brings Jake to a waterfall, where he dives to safety, leaving the Venator howling above him. Jake's team looks for him, but Trudy says they must return to base since night operations are not permitted. Grace claims he won't make it through the night. It's now nighttime, and Jake is honing a long stick into a spear. This time, Jake is being watched from above by a NA6. The NA6 shoots an arrow towards Jake and prepares to shoot when little, ethereal, glowing creatures descend on her bow. We later discover that they are extremely pure spirits, also known as the Seeds of Iwa, the all-powerful Navis deity. The archer withdraws. Jake is being pursued by a pack of viper wolves. He immerses the tip of his spear in a flammable pitch-like substance. He fires the end and uses it as a torch against the viper wolves, who surround him with their fangs bared and jaws snarling. The animals assault Jake, he fights back, killing several before being overpowered by others. The archer who had been watching Jake joins the fight on his side. She kills some viper wolves and drives the others away. She lovingly puts several sobbing injured animals out of their pain and prays for them. Jake tries to thank her for assisting him in repelling the intruders. She scorns his thanks and tells him that everything is his fault, that they did not have to die, and that he should go back to where he came from. Jake inquires as to whether she feels this way and why she assisted him. "You have a big heart. Have no worry," she elaborates. "But you're dumb." Jake seeks to follow his savior up into a tree, asks for her assistance, and expresses his want to learn. He is disgusted and instructed to return, since sky people cannot be taught. The Iwa seeds resurface and begin to land on the frightened Jake. He inquires as to what they are. "Very pure spirits," she responds, and Jake is engulfed in them, leaving an effect on his friend. When the seeds float away, she relents and invites him to accompany her. Jake is killed by a bolo thrown by an Omatakayan warrior patrol as he tries to catch up with his savior, Neytiri, Zoe Saldana. Tsute, Laz Alonso, the next in line to the throne and the man Neytiri is intended to marry, is their commander. "There has been a sign from Iwa," Neytiri says, stopping them from hurting Jake. Tsute orders his troops to deliver him to Tashik, father, roughly spelled, and Iwa, mother. Jake is introduced to Neytiri's parents, the tribe's king and queen, Itukan, Westudi, and Moat, CCH Pounder. Jake informs the elders that he is a warrior, a dream walker, and that he wishes to learn from them. Moat pricks Jake's chest and tastes his blood, declaring that it is Iwa's desire for him to live with the Omatakaya and for Neytiri, however reluctantly, to teach him their ways and customs. Jake is transported to his bed after a traditional gathering, a leaf high up in the home tree that encircles him like a cocoon. Human Jake gets reawakened as he falls asleep. At morning chow, all of the scientists, including Grace, are listening intently to everything Jake says. Norm is disappointed and depressed, he was Grace's first pick to bond with the Omatakaya. Jake has won over the military and corporate representatives. Jake looks to be their best hope at getting the Omatakaya to relocate or advising the colonel on how to force them to do so because home tree lies on a vast deposit of unobtainium. He is told that he has 3 months to complete his task before the bulldozers arrive. The next scenes focus upon Avatar Jake's training with Neytiri and human Jake's comments on his adventures via the videologue he dictates at the end of each day's activity. He forms a kinship with his dire horse, a sacred animal to the NA6. Jake will need to learn how to attach the animal and link his neural cue to its antenna. Human Jake continues to report on the infrastructure of the home tree as well as other NA6 specifics. Jake struggles to learn how to manage his dire horse and is frequently referred to as Sksong, Skown, by Neytiri and Tsute, which he explains means moron. Jake informs the colonel and Selfridge about the Omatakaya's home, the massive home tree. It has a significant amount of unobtainium beneath it. Jake explains the construction of the 1,000-foot-tall tree. Quaritch sees a chance to destroy the tree, but Jake requests that he be given the authority to speak with the NA6 and persuade them to depart. Grace chooses to get out of Dodge since she believes Jake is being exploited by Quaritch, Selfridge, and the rest of the Mining Operations Military Division. She transports them to the Hallelujah Mountains, a secluded location of vast, floating islands holy to the NA6 and rich in unobtainium. Grace wants the RDA officials and soldiers to leave her alone. Jake describes his language lessons in his next videologue and compares his time with the NA6 to field stripping a weapon. With enough repetition, you can't help but learn. This is intercut with images from his ongoing training with Neytiri, who educates him about the NA6 forest link. She informs Jake that all energy is borrowed and that we must return it one day. Jake appears to understand this, and when he prays for an animal he has just slain, Neytiri tells him that he is ready for a vital rite of passage, bonding with and riding a Declan, a flying mountain banshee. Jake must accompany Neytiri, Tsute, and 2 other NA6 trainees to the banshee breeding grounds. Several variables make this a perilous lesson: the height, the fury of the wild banshees, but Jake's lack of fear and successful relationship with his banshee gain him the grudging respect of the NA6 warriors there, including Tsute. He forms a relationship with the tendrils in his queue, and as he mounts the flying creature, he notes that he isn't much of a horseman, but he was born to do this. Jake, Neytiri, and the others ride together to the Tree of Souls, the NA6's most holy location. During a hunting mission, Jake and Neytiri are unexpectedly chased and assaulted by Turok, a large and vividly colored flying mountain banshee with homicidal intents for everything that flies. According to Neytiri, its name means last shadow, since the Turok's shadow is generally the final shadow one ever gets to see because its attack is nearly always lethal. Back at Home Tree, Neytiri shows Jake the bones of a previous Turok. She informs him that the last person to ride a Turok was her grandpa's grandfather, who used the horse to bring the 5 NA6 tribes together at a difficult period. Turok motto, Rider of the Last Shadow, would be given to such a person. When Jake returns to his human form, it's evident that this new encounter has altered him, as he explains, out there is the actual world, in here is the dream. The Colonel approaches him and informs him that his assignment has been completed and that he will return to Earth the next day. And, true to his promise, the Colonel has made arrangements for Jake to receive the therapy he requires to restore use of his legs. Jake intends to postpone his departure because he believes he is about to be inducted into the tribe and acknowledged as one of them, at which point he will be able to negotiate with the NA6 to move. The Colonel agrees. Jake attends a NA6 ritual and discovers that the NA6 believe that everyone may be born twice. Neytiri takes Jake to the Tree of Voices, a place of worship where they utilize their cues to unite with the tree. Jake is told by Neytiri that he can construct a bow from the tree, and that he may pick a woman. Jake informs Neytiri that he has already chosen her, and she responds that she has also chosen him. Jake wakes up in the lab after they sleep together under the tree. Neytiri is awakened in the morning by falling trees, followed by the presence of bulldozers. As the jungle crumbles around Neytiri, who is pulling and carrying Jake to safety, soldiers advance. Jake is preparing to join with his avatar at their isolated location, and when he finally awakens, he gets aboard one of the bulldozers and attempts to stop it, eventually breaking its camera system and attracting gunfire. Other NA6 warriors arrive, and the Colonel, who is watching movies back at the base, identifies Jake in his avatar form as the one who attempted to thwart their mission. The bulldozers continue their work, destroying the precious site. The NA6 desire war on Home Tree. Grace and Jake are opposed to it. There is a heated argument. Tsute attempts to murder Jake after learning that Jake and Neytiri are bonded for life while he and Neytiri were engaged. Jake asserts that he is a NA6 and so has the right to speak. The ties between Grace and Jake's avatars and their physical selves are abruptly severed by the infuriated Colonel, who arrests Jake for attempting to halt the bulldozers. Grace and Jake are up against RDA and military brass. Grace reveals that Pandora's trees form a network with more cerebral connections than the human brain, and that the NA6 can access it. As a result, the Omaticaya will never leave Home Tree again. Parker and the Colonel talk about their alternatives. He plans to launch an attack on Home Tree and use gas bombs to drive the NA6 away. Jake requests permission to return to the Omaticaya and persuade them to leave, and he is given 1 hour to do so. Jake and Grace are not invited to return. Jake is rejected by Neytiri. Jake and Grace have both been chained and abandoned by the Omaticaya, who are prepared to attack the humans, who have come in a massive fleet of flying ships. The fleet fires gas canisters into Home Tree and its environs. As the conflict progresses, the majority of the firepower is directed towards the root structure of Home Tree, which is brought down by a barrage of explosions and heavy artillery. Many Omadikeya are slaughtered. Moat releases Jake and Grace and requests that they save the tribe. When Jake comes, he is rebuffed once more by Neytiri when he attempts to soothe her. Itukan, Neytiri's father, is killed by a massive piece of shrapnel. His dying desire is for Neytiri to live to take his sacred vow and assume leadership of their people. The damage appears to be infinite, until Jake and Grace return to their human bodies and are swiftly arrested for treason. Norm gets imprisoned as well for attempting to prevent troops from deactivating their avatar forms. The NA6 congregate around the Tree of Souls. Trudy enters the cell containing Jake, Grace, and Norm. She dupes their security by claiming she doesn't want anything to do with them, only to knock out the guards seconds later. Grace is shot and injured by the colonel as they prepare to depart the base. Trudy's spacecraft is flown to the distant facility in the floating mountains, and the crew takes a pod to another location in the forest. Jake regains control of his avatar body. The anticipated reunion with the Omadikeya is not to be. Jake is an outsider, a stranger. So he makes a risky decision. He knows that in order to win the NA6's confidence, he must take things to the next level. He summons his Banshee and goes in search of Turok. His method is simple, but it can quickly lead to death. Jake believes that the Turok never seeks an assault above himself, thus he can be attacked in this manner. Jake leaps from his Banshee to the rear of the Turok. He next appears riding the Turok at the Tree of Souls during an Omadikeyan ritual. Jake has formed a strong relationship with the Turok. The Omadikeya are astounded to see the fulfillment of their greatest tale. Jake dismounts and walks past the gathering of NA6, who part before him in amazement. When he approaches Neytiri, they both extend their arms to each other, and she exclaims, "I see you." Tsute, the tribe's new leader, accepts Jake's new duty as Turok motto. He holds Jake in high regard. Jake persuades Moat to assist Grace, who is dying. Moat starts the preparations, which include positioning Grace's human and avatar bodies near the Tree of Souls. Grace's consciousness will be permanently transferred to her avatar. Moat informs Grace that she must pass through the Eye of Iwa, and that the Great Mother may choose to let her pass through to her avatar self, or she may choose to keep Grace with her. The ceremony fails, but Grace informs Jake before she dies that she has seen Iwa. Jake, saddened and enraged, assumes the form of Turok motto and declares that it is time to send a message to the Sky People that this is their, the NA6's, territory. To accomplish so, they must first approach each of the NA6 clans and request that they fight as one. Tsute will be the next Omadikeyan clan head and will assist unite other clans to fight with them. The human military has seen an increase in the number of NA6 in the region, from a few hundred to 2,000 in a single day. At this pace, the colonel explains to his soldiers, the NA6 will soon number 20,000, and their perimeter will be overwhelmed. Rather than allowing that to happen, he says, they must launch a preemptive strike while they still have the opportunity. Their idea is to convert a space shuttle into a huge bomb transport. The Tree of Souls is their goal, and the attack is scheduled at 0600 the next day. They think that if they destroy the Tree of Souls, the NA6 will flee and never return to this area. Jake is hard at work rallying the Omadikeya. He uses his power to join with the Tree of Souls and begs Iwa to investigate Grace's memories, emphasizing that people destroyed their mother, Earth, the entity that preserves the balance of life. Neytiri comes and informs Jake that Iwa is impartial. Quaritch amasses his fleet, mostly to guard the Valkyrie shuttle. The bomb ship and the Armada are making their way toward the Tree of Souls. The combined NA6 force begins to descend from the skies and land. Jake, Tsute, and other warriors engage in combat with military aircraft, mostly Scorpion attack ships. On both sides, casualties are mounting. Although the gunships boast unrivaled firepower, they are no match for the Jake, riding the Turok, is pursued and shot at by Colonel Quaritch's Dragonfly ship. Trudy arrives and opens fire on the colonel's command ship. Neytiri's Banshee is shot down and killed. Norm's avatar is mortally wounded and jumps back to his human form. Tsute attempts to take on the bomb ship and is killed in the attempt. Trudy dies when her ship is destroyed from the ground. Neytiri observes the action. Jake makes a failed attempt to contact Tsute, as well as an unsuccessful attempt to contact Trudy. Meanwhile, the bomb ship approaches the Tree of Souls. Jake instructs Neytiri to leave the fight through communicator. A battalion of Titan others, Pandora's massively armored dinosaur-like beasts, appears and attacks the Earth soldiers through what remains of the surrounding forest. They easily annihilated troops and soldiers wearing amp suits. Neytiri rejoins the fight, overjoyed that Iwo has heard Jake's appeal for aid, with many other Pandoran species following her. When a Venator approaches nearby, it bows submissively to her. As the military's ground forces flee in confusion, Jake and his Tauric go to the skies to fight the bomb ship. Jake grenades the bomb ship as he approaches from above. It bursts into flames and explodes far away from the Tree of Souls. Jake also places explosives in susceptible areas of the command structure. Colonel Quaritch dons an amp suit and leaps off the command ship before it explodes in a ball of flames. Grace has put up a makeshift camp for him. Jake is inside his avatar pod at the camp. Quaritch, intent on killing Jake, is immediately assaulted by a Venator with whom Neytiri had formed a relationship and rode to the location. The Colonel destroys the Venator using his amp suit, trapping Neytiri beneath it. Jake appears in his avatar before the Colonel gets a chance to assassinate Neytiri. The Colonel fights in his amp suit, while Jake fights as his avatar, armed simply with a piece of pipe. When Jake breaks the suit's plastic canopy, the Colonel rips it off, puts on a breathing mask, and asks Jake how it feels to have betrayed his people before moving off toward the structures that hold the pods. "Do you believe you're one of them? It's time to get up," he taunts as he smashes into the mobile lab in search of Jake's pod, intending to destroy it and kill Jake. The war continues. Jake gets seized by an amp suit arm and dangles from his line in front of the Colonel. The Colonel draws Jake closer to him and pulls out his knife, preparing to cut Jake's throat. Neytiri suddenly fires an arrow at the Colonel, impaling him in the middle of his chest. The Colonel is shaken and unable to resume his assault on Jake. Neytiri's second arrow connects with the first. It knocks the Colonel dressed in the amp suit to the ground. However, the facility has suffered significant damage and is now seeping into the planet's deadly atmosphere. Human Jake is awake but having trouble breathing and putting on a mask. Neytiri appears and assists Jake in putting on his mask. "I see you," she whispers, cradling human Jake. This is the first time they've seen back at Hell's Gate. The majority of the remaining humans are being marched aboard a shuttle to be sent to Earth. However, a few Earth citizens, including Norm and Dr. Patel, are invited to stay on Pandora. Jake signs out in his farewell videologue, where we discover that he has decided to permanently transfer his consciousness to his avatar. Jake walks through the Eye of Iwa, and awakens in his avatar, with Neytiri gazing over him, in a ceremony identical to Grace's.